Morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Joe Imbriano, the Fullerton Informer, coming to you on April 19th, 2018. This morning we had some nice little bit of sprinkling of moisture in Southern California. It looks like they backed off the chemtrails for a day, and we got about a millionth of an inch of rain, but it's better than nothing. I wanted to talk to you this morning about those of you who are considering having a child or are already pregnant. And I wanted to talk to you about what you can do to make sure that you have a healthy child. Because, let's face it, folks, if you manage to escape the sterilizing microwave radiation in school, maybe you're old enough to not have had to have gone through that, and you were fortunate enough to get pregnant and have a child and conceive a child, then this is for you. Because I want to talk to you about what awaits your child when you go to the hospital. I'm not a medical doctor. Anything I say should not be construed as medical advice. I don't intend to treat or cure any illness. I just simply want to inform people of what I believe could prevent nightmares. One of the best things you could do if you're going to have a child is perhaps instead of going to the hospital, if you're relatively healthy and you're confident in your ability to deal with childbirth, if you've been through it before and you know what to expect, I strongly suggest that you have a home birth with a midwife, and then you won't have to deal with most of what I'm about to explain. You see, folks, when you go to the hospital, you're basically going to an assembly line. And a hospital is nothing more than a business, most of which are set up as non-profits, so they don't have to pay any taxes. But it's all about what's called medical economics, ladies and gentlemen. It's all about the bottom line, profit, maximizing profit, and making the most out of the time in the facility. And what that involves is shortening your time in the facility and maximizing the amount of expenses incurred while you're there. Childbirth is a natural procedure, ladies and gentlemen. It's something that has been around since the dawn of time, and it has been something that's been accomplished without the intervention of the allopathic petrochemical poison-pushing system that we know as modern medicine in the United States. When you conceive a child, they start running you back and forth to the obstetrician's office. And then they start sticking an ultrasound device on your abdomen. Now, before I go any further on that, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to warn you that if God really wanted you to see what was inside your womb, he would have put a clear window on your stomach. So, we're not supposed to be irradiating these children with ultrasound waves. If you look at the ultrasounds, the children inside the womb will actually try to cover their ears and get out of the way of this sonic attack, this sonic blast, that actually results in cavitation in the brain fluid of the baby, and a lot of other things it does to the child, including tormenting the child in the womb. It's weaponry, folks. Ultrasonic emissions coming from an ultrasound device in the doctor's office is a weapon, and it's designed to torture the child. You don't need to know if it's a boy or a girl, folks. You'll know soon enough. As soon as that baby comes out, you're going to know. You don't need to prepare for these kind of things. What you do need to do is minimize the impact of modern technology on that unborn child. I would avoid at all costs all prenatal tests, all ultrasound testing. I would just decline it all, and I would just go to the doctor, and as long as you're not passing blood, and as long as you're not losing weight and you're not feeling all kinds of pain and high blood pressure and all these crazy things, if you're just going along and you're gaining 20 or 30 pounds and eating like a cow and sleeping and feeling the baby kick around, then you got no problems. There's nothing the doctors can do while that child is in your womb that's going to make any difference in terms of its outcome. I firmly believe that. I think everything else is just more hocus pocus and more eugenics. And when they want to do a genetic test and they want to stick a needle through your stomach and through the womb and into the placental fluid and finally into the unborn child, what do you think that does to the unborn child besides extracting some of its fluid? Do you think it has a psychological impact on that child? Well, I can tell you that it does, because that child is not designed by God to have to ever endure anything remotely close to that type of a pain or that type of a sensation at that stage in its development. And it leaves an indelible mark in its psyche. Now, the goal of these amniotic sampling tests is to determine whether this child is going to be born with any genetic abnormalities. So, I know of plenty of occasions where we've had false positives on these birth defect tests, and the child actually came out 100% normal when the parents were advised, well, you may want to terminate the pregnancy. In other words, the doctors don't have a 100% success rate on these tests. They're not accurate. There's inaccuracies, there's false positives, there's bad readings, there's bad data that actually have children ending up getting aborted. Ladies and gentlemen, that's horrific, but it fits into the larger picture of the baby parts business, because a parted out fetus is worth a lot of money. There's a big demand for organs and stem cells and all kinds of baby parts, folks. And I know that's a sick reality, but that's part of the medical economics. I repeat that word. So let's just say you're, 4 months in and they want to give you a glucose test. What they want to do is the doctors want to see how resilient your insulin production is. So what they do is they give you this cup of orange flavored muck, and it has the equivalent of a 6-pack of soda in it in terms of its sugar content. So I don't know anybody in the world that would willingly drink a small cup that has as much sugar as a 6-pack of soda while they're pregnant. Now, they do this ostensibly to test for gestational diabetes, to make sure that the mother's insulin levels can adequately deal with the increased strain on the body and the unborn child that's growing in the womb. But how in the world is it natural to shock your system like that? What do you think that does to the baby? What do you think drinking a 6-pack of soda's worth of sugar in a half a cup at one time in one gulp is going to do to the insulin ability, the insulin levels of the mother and the child? Well, that sets the baby up for diabetes. That's what it does, folks. Once again, that guarantees future business for the system of medical economics, ladies and gentlemen. So I strongly advise you to avoid the glucose test. And may I remind you that you have every right to say no to every test these doctors want to perform on you. Now, if the doctor doesn't want to see you anymore and tells you he can't treat you anymore, then you have the right to say thank you very much and it's been nice knowing you. And you don't need his treatment, ladies and gentlemen, because he's not treating you. What he's doing is he's following protocols that were set forth by his malpractice insurance company that are all designed to comply with and further the prosperity of the medical economics model. That's exactly what it is, folks. Once again, the more tests, the more problems, the more money. The more tests, the more diagnoses, the more prescriptions. I wanted to talk to you about supplementation if you're pregnant. This is extremely important. One of the biggest misconceptions in the medical community today is the equivocation of folate with folic acid. Let me repeat those two words, folate and folic acid. Now, you're going to hear those terms juxtaposed and intertwined, intermingled, and used as the same word having the same meaning, when nothing could be further from the truth. Folic acid is a synthetic version of folate, folks, and it has deleterious effects on your body. I recommend that nobody that is pregnant ever take folic acid as a supplement. I recommend that if you are pregnant and you want to have a healthy baby, and you don't want to be delivering a child that has these neural tube defects, then eat things that have folate in them. Folate comes from the word leaf. Foliage, that's where we get the word foliage from. Folate is found in green leafy vegetables. Eat your vegetables, ladies and gentlemen. This is common sense. You do not need to be taking a synthetic form of a vitamin that actually can harm you and harm your body's ability to metabolize folate and other B-complex vitamins that are crucial for healthy development of your unborn child. Once again, do not take folic acid. Folic acid is basically a poison, ladies and gentlemen, and there's a strong correlation between the onset of the enriching of cereals and baked goods with folic acid and the incidence of all kinds of congenital abnormalities appearing in our young children. So once again, folic acid is poison, folks, and you need to realize what it does. I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry from the University of California, Irvine. I also have a bachelor's degree in biological science from the University of California, Irvine. So I'm very familiar with how to read studies and how to read ingredients. And I understand the difference between the left-handed and right-handed versions of molecules, their chirality, their different configurations, and the difference configurations and chirality of molecules can have on biological systems. And this is exactly what we're talking about, folks. Not all molecules are created equal, and it really depends on who created them in the first place. The naturally occurring molecules are what you want. Those are occurring in nature. They're plant-based. They're animal-based. They're based out of God's creation. Synthetic versions are derived from petrochemical poison and synthesized in a laboratory and mass-produced in a factory for your consumptive purposes and for the furtherance of the medical economics agenda, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we've discussed that. I want to talk about iron. Iron's another thing they tell you need. Well, oxidation state is key with iron, and the form is key with iron. The best form of iron you can take if you're pregnant and you're anemic is to get it from plant sources. Eat your green leafy vegetables, once again, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if you can't eat enough organically grown green leafy vegetables, and you have to take an iron supplement, by all means, do not take ferrous sulfate. Ferrous sulfate is garbage. Your stools will turn into black tar. You will become constipated. And once again, the reason the doctors give ferrous sulfate in the obstetrician's office to pregnant women is because of the fact that once you take ferrous sulfate and you start getting constipated, you will have to come back for another prescription for a stool softener. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, the medical economics model at work. Now, the best way to get your iron is from a form called ferrous gluconate. And where does that come from? Well, it's a plant-based iron, and one of the best places to get that, at virtually hardly any cost to you, is out of a can of olives. Now, I'm not a big fan of eating canned foods because of the BPA and the other compounds in there, but if you can manage to get yourself, for a short period of time, a ferrous gluconate supplement. Now that is available in the health food stores from a product called Floridix. That comes in a glass jar. It's also got some B vitamins in it, and it's also got some herbs in it. I strongly recommend that to anybody out there who is pregnant, who's got anemia issues, because that's an easily absorbable form of iron that does not constipate. It's plant-based and it's natural. Now, if you don't want to spend $30 for a jar of ferrous gluconate from Floridix, you can go buy iron in the olive cans. You can get some good California black olives, and they add ferrous gluconate as a stabilizing agent to maintain the color of the olives. Ferrous gluconate is a harmless form of iron. Now, because we're in the age of microwave exposures, ladies and gentlemen, this is very important. Your iron levels are key, and I strongly recommend for those of you that don't have access to what I just mentioned, or you're really concerned with being irradiated all day because you're stuck in an office or in a job where you've got Wi-Fi exposure everywhere, you need to take a form of iron called carbonyl iron. This is one of the best types of iron you could take to protect your brain, your body, and the child's brain from microwave exposure, because carbonyl iron is one of the best microwave absorbers in the world. That's why they paint the stealth bomber with a polymer paint that contains carbonyl iron. So, we've kind of touched on some of the basic common sense supplementation techniques that I recommend. Now, you need to avoid sugar like the plague. You need to eat your fruits and vegetables, eat most of your food raw, try to eat organic stuff. Stay away from peanuts. Peanuts are very allergenic while you're pregnant. And really just have a common sense diet, ladies and gentlemen. You want to eat things that God created, and you want to eat them in as natural of a source as possible. Hopefully foods that were grown outside in the sunlight, not in some greenhouse in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, inside a brick building under fluorescent lighting. You want to eat some fresh food, go to your farmers markets, try to get it from there, and just eat common sense, natural foods that you instinctively know are healthy. That's a really good thing to keep in mind. Now, your stomach, if you can make a fist and look at it, that's the size of your stomach, ladies and gentlemen. So overeating is another problem when you're pregnant. And you're going to have cravings, and that's because you're probably deficient in some things. So you need to control your appetite. And one of the ways to do that is to eat, when you sit down and have dinner, don't eat a portion bigger than your fist, because that's the size of your stomach. And you want to make sure it's packed chock full of really healthy foods, all right? That's all common sense. That goes without saying. Now, I want to talk about what happens once you get to the hospital, because this is where it gets dangerous. This is where I lose people, because people don't want to do this, but you've got to write up a birth plan, and you've got to put it in writing, and you have to have this with your obstetrician or your regular doctor that you see, and bring a copy to the hospital once you're admitted, if you're going to choose to have a hospital delivery. You need to basically look into everything they do. I can tell you what they're going to do when you get there. They're going to hook you up to an IV, which you don't need. You're not dehydrated, you don't have some medical condition, you don't need to be hooked up to anything. Second of all, they're going to try to induce you with a compound called Pitocin, which is basically very similar to oxys that they prescribe for pain. These are opiate-based drugs. When you induce a child to be born with a Pitocin administration, you are setting that child up later on in life for an opioid addiction, folks, because you're introducing the Pitocin into the bloodstream, which crosses the placenta. So you don't want to get induced, because what that does is not only does it set your kid up for drug addiction in the future, but it also forces the child and the contractions to come quicker and more intensely and a lot stronger than they would, and it makes the childbirth more painful. That's very dangerous for the mother, and that's very bad for the child that's coming out. The birthing process is stressful and traumatic enough as it is. What has to happen, folks, is you need to be, if you're pregnant, you need to be spending as much time on your feet as possible, walking around and getting exercise, standing up, and having sex with your partner as often as possible, folks, because that is all good. That is all natural. And you gotta try to make sure that you stand up and you walk a lot, because the weight of that baby pushing down on that cervix is really going to help your delivery. It's going to help your Kegel muscles in the process. Overall, just standing and walking and just basic common sense exercise and staying active when you're pregnant is key. Sedentary lifestyles while you're pregnant is a recipe for almost a guaranteed cesarean section. And once again, that works out real well for the medical economics model. Now, I'd strongly recommend that you don't get induced, you don't get an IV hooked up to you, and I strongly recommend you don't take the epidural. I strongly suggest you deal with the pain, because the epidural has side effects. When they stick that thing in your spine, there's a chance you can be paralyzed. I'm sorry, but I would not want to risk being paralyzed for an hour's worth of pain that comes and goes. Now, another thing that's a problem with the epidural is it crosses the placenta. These are narcotics, folks. These are nerve agents. These are things that can affect the IQ of the child. You have to realize that if you are going to have a child, you need to rough this out and tough this out and get ready for it, because it doesn't last forever. If you're healthy and you're active and you eat right and you do the right things, your child labor is not going to be 20 hours. It may be 20 minutes. Now, one of the things that is totally important, and I don't understand why people don't see this, is I have never seen anybody take a dump on their back. But everybody sits down and squats on a toilet when they go to the bathroom. Why is it that we're delivering babies on our back, ladies and gentlemen? Why is it that we're not using the force of that baby coming out by sitting up to help aid the birthing process? Well, once again, back labor is another invention of the medical economic system. When you're laying on your back, it's very painful and it's very inefficient, and you're working against your body's mechanism to deliver that child. When you're in a squatting position, like in most countries, they have birthing chairs where they sit in these things and they give birth to the children. A lot of places do the childbirth underwater. Laying on your back, having a child in stirrups and strapped to the bed hooked up to an IV is a recipe for disaster. And the hospitals know this because it's good for the medical economics model. There's a lot of money to be made off of hooking up an IV and administering Pitocin and then inducing the child and then hooking up the epidural into the spine with that neurologist and anesthesiologist. And now you've got a situation where the baby doesn't want to come out because the pregnancy is so difficult and the labor is so intensive that now they want to do a C-section. So once again, we're back to the medical economics model. So ladies and gentlemen, what I'm trying to warn you against is falling victim and succumbing to the machinations of the medical economic system. Everything that they do in the hospital is contrary to common sense when it comes to childbirth. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a time and a place. You know, a hospital is a great place to go if you're in an emergency, life-threatening situation. But the vast majority of pregnancies and child deliveries are not life-threatening situations. Childbirth is a natural process. It occurs every day, every minute of the day, all over the world without medical intervention. Now, let's assume that you are in the hospital, and let's assume that you're about to deliver, and let's just say your contractions aren't coming fast enough. They're going to tell you have to be induced because they don't want you taking up that room. They only get X amount of dollars for a childbirth, so they got to make sure you're in there for as short a period of time as possible so they can rent that room out to the next victim. So what they're going to suggest is they break your water and induce you to make your contractions come quicker, faster, and harder. And when they do that, that baby is trapped in there without the amniotic fluid, and the lung changeover begins without any air for that child to breathe. So I strongly recommend they don't break your water. Never let them break your water. Do you understand me, folks? Your water will break when it's ready to break. The water breaks when it's time, and the lubricant that it creates is what is necessary to glide that child out of the birth canal. Never let them use forceps. All of the things they do in a hospital during a childbirth work against the natural processes that God has put in place during this procedure. This is something that is being interfered with and manipulated, and it is all in the name of medical economics. So once again, it is very important that you remember what I just said. Now, once the child is born, hopefully the head comes first, which is the way it's supposed to. That child will come out head first, and you'll see it all covered in a substance called the meconium. It's really interesting looking. It looks like kind of a tarish substance all over the body. And when that baby comes out, it is connected to the umbilical cord, which is connected to the placenta. Do not let the doctors clamp that umbilical cord. I repeat this, folks. That umbilical cord needs to remain intact and untouched by the doctor or the nurse during the birthing procedure. What has to happen is that placenta has to be delivered before that cord is even touched. Don't touch the umbilical cord. Don't clamp the umbilical cord. Do not listen to the doctors on this one. Put that in writing in your birth plan. No clamping of the umbilical cord until the placenta is delivered and the cord stops pulsation. The placenta is delivering the blood supply to the child that it needs to survive. The placenta is delivering oxygen to that baby until the changeover to oxygenation through respiration through the air intake is completed. They are dropping the IQs of 20 to 30 points at a time on these children when they're clamping that umbilical cord, ladies and gentlemen. That is a barbaric practice, and once again, all part of the medical economics model, because guess what happens when you clamp the umbilical cord prematurely? The baby is born without 30 to 40% of its blood supply. Now, one of the most common things that happens to a child after it's born is it develops something called jaundice, where its bilirubin levels are off. And that is a direct result of being short on its blood supply, and is a direct result of premature umbilical cord clamping. Once again, folks, when you come back to the emergency room 4 days after you had your baby because its eyes are yellow and its skin looks weird, you're going to sit there for a couple hours and they're going to run a bunch of tests on this baby. And once again, medical economics, ladies and gentlemen. That's exactly what this is all about. So the solution here is to leave everything be, but you've got to put it in writing, because when you go into the hospital, they take control of the situation. Unless you have a written plan in advance, then you are in control of the situation, folks. Now, another thing they do when that baby comes out is they inject it with a synthetic vitamin K shot. And this is a thickening agent to thicken up the blood of the newborn child immediately after birth. Now, why would you want to thicken up the blood at its most crucial time in its existence, when the lung changeover begins and the heart's beating at 200 beats a minute? It's absolutely amazing how people just go along with this. Ladies and gentlemen, do not take the vitamin K shot. Decline that as well. You want thin blood flying at the speed of light through those veins and arteries and capillaries when that child is born. That baby's pumping itself up full of fresh blood through all the tissues and getting air in all the tissues from the lungs, not the umbilical cord. You can't mess with the viscosity of the blood. So, I want to point that out. And decline the hepatitis vaccine. Your child has not had sex with a hooker, had time spent on a dirty toilet seat in a public restroom. Decline that as well. Don't put the stuff in the eyes. Decline the eye drops. You don't want to torture this kid. You want to put this kid straight to the breast. Once that child is born, immediately straight to the breast. No place else. Not to the warmer, not to the sink. There's plenty of time to wash the child off after it calms down. You will be psychologically impacting and damaging that child if you take that child out of a 98.6 degree amniotic fluid sac and put it under running water and take it away and have it feel all these sensations it's not used to. The first thing that child needs to feel is that mother's breast in its mouth and the warmth of the mother's touch, not the cold hands of the nurse or the doctor. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Joe Imbriano. We'll pick this up later, but I wanted to cover the basics of childbirth and what you need to know to have a healthy child and to have a healthy living style and healthy life. Because let me tell you something, if you ruin your kid in the womb and during the birthing procedures, you're going to spend the next 18 years of your life at Chalk Hospital or at the doctor's office, and it will never end because it's all about medical economics. Folks, don't be another victim of the medical economic system. This is Joe Imbriano, the Fullerton Informer, coming to you from the lovely Orange County, California, hoping you enjoyed this message. Once again, this message is not intended to diagnose or treat any illness, but it is designed to give you medical freedom, folks. And freedom is power. And the truth will set you free. In Jesus' name we go, folks. Amen.